a, multi- a multidisciplinary approach integrating literature, art, social science, and medicine, being organized by Atma Sanatan Dharma College in collaboration with MMTTC, Ramanujan College, under the aegis of University Grants Commission. Well, we have had many wonderful sessions, informative as well as inspiring. And in continuing with the same tradition, we are going to have another discussion about the intervention of literature in terms of stress management. And before I introduce the resource person for this session, Professor Nidhi Vats, who has joined us from the Department of English, University of Delhi, I would like to say a few things. As evident, I mean, we have been told and we have heard and read that early humans evolved into storytellers because it was the only way they could survive. Stories helped the early humans to share their knowledge and respond to future threats as a group. As human societies became more complex, so did the stories. Gradually, they have taken on a reality of their own. They are to be seen as codified and embodied knowledge that is passed effortlessly from one generation to another. Children acquire skills of psychological response and social behavior through simulated realities. Well, we have all read and savored a lot of stories since our childhood. Grandma tales, bedtime tales, Aesop's fables, Katha Sarit Sagar, Panchatantra tales, Akbar Birbal tales, Arabian Nights, the mythical stories from our grand epics, Ramayana and the Mahabharata, the folk tales featuring legendary characters, heroes and villains to the stories now being told in cafes, museums, schools, theaters, community centers, therapy centers, museums, clubs. The effectiveness of stories ranges today from healing to empowerment and to conditioning the minds. For centuries, stories have held their sway over popular consciousness and provided answers to our aesthetic and socio-political quandaries. Talking about the stories that we have commonly heard, taught, and discussed, one can clearly say that they add a great deal of depth to human experience. Whether it's O. Henry's The Last Leaf, Guy de Maupassant's The Necklace, Herman Melville's Bartleby the Scrivener, The Snows of Kilimanjaro by Ernest Hemingway, Toba Tek Singh by Manto, The Gift of the Magi, or the stories by Prem Chand and other Hindi writers or vernacular writers writing in their languages. We have received ample insights into diverse human experiences about human nature, human greed, the isolation that people feel, the ideas of resistance, resilience, encounters with mortality and diseases, and also the need for social change. Parable stories continue to be the prime mode of entertainment, pleasure, and therapy, as well as create avenues for affecting social change and personality development, and can never go out of relevance. All of the stories that we have heard, created, or been part of, they are seen as repositories of a community's cultural legacy and can fill in the gaps in formal history in a substantial way. Professional storytellers, dastangos, filmmakers, fiction writers, playwrights, politicians, orators, therapists, counselors, new generation multimedia persons, all of the individuals, with the help of this timeless source of magic, have interpreted, influenced, suggested, and controlled the mind's choices of individuals, scenarios, word, and the truth. Now, in order to talk about the therapeutic features of stories and their various types and the way they function, we have amidst us a very knowledgeable resource person, Professor Nidhi Vats, who is a prolific scholar with numerous publications to her credit, including 3 books, Living Strategy in Manju Kapoor's Difficult Daughters and Namita Gokhale's Gods, Graves, and Godmothers, a comparative study, Mythical Interpretations in Sri Aurobindo's Savitri, and her recent publication being Foregrounding Disability Studies in Literature and Visual Arts with Professor Anil Kianeja from Oxford University Press. An associate professor in the Department of English with over 13 years of teaching experience, she has published numerous articles and research papers in journals and books. Her areas of expertise include Indian English literature, Indian mythology, language studies, folklore studies, and disability studies. Now, without further ado, I invite Dr. Nidhi Vats to share her insights on the subject of the therapeutic function of storytelling whenever she is ready. Over to you, Nidhi ma'am.
Thank you, Dr. Shubha, and thank you for those kind words. Since it's a post-lunch session, keeping everybody awake would be a challenge for me, but I'll try my best. So as Shubha summarized very beautifully, storytelling has been more than an art. It has been survival. So across cultures and centuries, stories have helped people endure suffering, make sense of loss, and imagine hope at some point of time. Whether told by, let's say, a firelight or read in solitude, anyway, shared in the whispers, stories offer a form of emotional anchoring. And this is my point of view. They help articulate what hurts, carry what overwhelms, and sometimes also connect what feels broken. Now, long before literature, and this discussion won't be based solely on oral storytelling, but long before literature was analyzed for its style and structure, it was valued for its effect, for what it did to listeners and readers. Now, stories soothed restless minds. They sometimes explain the mysteries and pass down memories, sort of things. Now, in many traditions, to tell a story was not simply to entertain, but to heal. Now, so let's go back a little into the antiquity. The therapeutic power of storytelling finds one of its earliest articulations in ancient Greece, and I'm pretty sure many of you are already aware of that. I'm talking about Aristotle and the Poetics. So he introduced the concept of catharsis, again, pretty much familiar to all of you. Um, we know that it can loosely be translated to purification, purgation, cleansing, emotional release. Now, for Aristotle, tragedy was not merely an artistic genre, it performed a vital emotional function. Now, we always say arousing pity and fear in the audience. So, by arousing pity and fear in the audience and then resolving these emotions through narrative form, tragedy offered a structured experience of emotional clarity and relief. Now, Aristotle argued that this emotional transformation was possible because tragedy imitates actions of consequence and moral weight, not randomness, but what he called a complete action of a certain magnitude. Its structure typically involves a reversal of fortune as peripeteia and anagnorosis that bring emotional and ethical insight. Now, rather than repressing difficult emotions, tragedy allows them to surface within the safe boundaries of story narration. In this way, catharsis functions as an aesthetic process through which pain is not denied but rendered intelligible. We all know about Oedipus Rex by Sophocles, very famous example, because I'm not going into the details of the story, but when Oedipus discovers the truth about his identity and fate, the audience undergoes a parallel emotional journey. Uh, we feel horror, sorrow. Ultimately, there's a quiet resolution. You may not be happy about it, but there is a resolution. The story does not offer redemption, but it does offer coherence. Through the character's falls and final self awareness, viewers are um, invited to reflect on human frailty, responsibility, and the limits of knowledge. So the performance becomes a space where deep fears are felt and then released, leaving the audience subtly realigned. Um, Also, this is a much larger discussion that Aristotle's view marked a departure from his teacher Plato, who was suspicious of poetry's emotional pull. Actually, Plato feared that art could distort truth and stir irrational feelings. By contrast, Aristotle saw emotional engagement as both natural and necessary. It's a part of being human. For him, literature did not mislead, it offered a way to process the ambiguities of life through imitation, mimesis, and also reflection. So, it's not a hidden knowledge that the influence of Aristotle's theory extends far beyond antiquity. We have later literature from King Lear to Mrs. Dalloway to Dostoevsky, Camus, everywhere. We see the endearing presence of stories that do not shy away from suffering, but shape it into a meaningful form. These works and others do not always offer answers, but they offer encounters, spaces in which readers can witness moral conflict, endure emotional intensity, and there will be a glimpse of beauty within pain. So, in a way, catharsis is not about escaping grief or fear, but it's about facing them within a narrative frame that invites reflection and emotional clarity. It shows us that stories can carry our most difficult emotions not as burdens, but as meaning. And in doing so, actually, Aristotle laid the groundwork for viewing literature not just as an art, but as a quiet, enduring form of healing. Um, Now, coming ahead from there, um, while Aristotle's theory of catharsis in written tragedy articulates an early model of emotional healing through narrative, the therapeutic roots of storytelling stretch even deeper into oral traditions. Like I think Shubha also said a few words about that. So these intimate, collective, and often sacred practices passed down from generations to generation by voice, gesture, memory, everything, uh, precede literary texts and offer a more fluid, performative mode of narrative transmission. Unlike the authored literature, storytelling is dynamic and relational. So it is sort of shaped by the communal memory and immediate presence. So its purpose extends again beyond entertainment. Basically functions as a medium of emotional regulation. Moral instructions also is already there, but most importantly, cultural continuity. So it plays a critical role in preserving cultural memory, especially in societies where histories are fragmented, not written, or maybe erased by colonialism, migration, violence, many things. So myths and folk tales and epic encode psychological and ethical knowledge, offering symbolic frameworks for interpreting experience. I mean, India is the best example for that. We have a very rich tradition of both oral narratives and the written narratives. Um, in contexts where written records have failed or been silenced, oral traditions emerge as acts of resistance and remembrance. For instance, apart from India, uh, West African griots They have long safeguarded genealogies and historical narratives through performance because they ensure the intergenerational continuity despite political upheaval. Similarly, there are indigenous communities from Navajo to Aboriginal Australians. They preserve healing narratives through ritual storytelling, uh, enabling not only memory but also communal processing of trauma. Among the most psychologically potent forms of oral narratives are those shared within families, particularly by grandmothers, mothers, and other caregivers. In my case, it was my father. So, bedtime stories, though often overlooked, like it's almost taken for granted, they actually constitute a ritual of emotional containment. So these narratives, simple, rhythmic, and repetitive, help reduce anxiety and establish sort of routine. And then, so deepen beyond the bond beyond the uh, child and the caregiver. So, in this context, I would like to mention the attachment theory. Attachment theory was developed by John Bowlby and later on elaborated by Mary Ainsworth. So, this tells us that such rituals are foundational for secure emotional development. Um, Repetitive storytelling provides children with a sense of predictability and structure, forming what developmental psychologists describe as a secure base from which exploration and emotional independence can grow. Um, in education and development psychology, the cognitive function of storytelling is well established. I'm not a psychologist, these are theories for me. So, Jerome Werner has argued that narrative is central to how humans structure experience. Um, and later on, by other experts, it was emphasized the internalization of cultural tools like stories for emotional and intellectual growth. So, a tale of, let's say, a clever rabbit or a wandering child offers not only entertainment but also symbolic resolution of fear, loneliness, moral conflict. Through such stories, children learn to name emotions. They imagine the agency. And also, they can also practice problem solving in symbolic form. Now, modern literature often draws on these oral traditions, particularly in post colonial and feminist contexts, where storytelling becomes both um, theme and technique. In Toni Morrison's Beloved, a very famous example, oral memory surfaces through fragmented, recursive narration. So the novel actually mirrors the non-linear rhythm of spoken narrative, where repetition, silence, and speech overlap to uh, express unspeakable historical trauma. So here, characters constantly revise and retell their stories, affirming that narration is not static but reconstructed. There are many other examples, and not just uh, the novels and the stories, but in, let's say, English poetry and other examples are there. What I'm saying is that um, symbolism is one of the hallmarks of oral narratives' therapeutic potential. So, a journey through, let's say, a dark forest, a weeping tree, or a broken mirror, all these things may encode emotions such as fear, grief, or shame that are otherwise inexpressible. So, this symbolism helps children manage internal conflict by projecting it onto narrative forms. Crucially, oral storytelling is a communal act. It involves not only the speaker and listener, but also there is this shared emotional and physical space in which the story unfolds. Unlike solitary reading, oral narration invites collective participation. So, in settings of collective mournings, wakes and memories, festivals, everything, storytelling fosters co-witnessing and shared catharsis, as we said earlier. So it is not analysis that heals, but presence, recognition, and the act of telling itself. And therefore, uh, oral storytelling serves as an emotional scaffold, upholding memory, identity, and uh, feeling across generations. This enables children to navigate in a world and the communities to preserve dignity amidst erasure and cultures to encode healing within language. So, in the literary domain, this tradition continues to inform form, theme, and structure, allowing the ancient logic of healing stories to endure. So, while oral storytelling safeguards cultural memory within rhythm and repetition, there's something called trauma literature. Again, you're pretty much familiar with this, that confronts the rupture of such continuity. Um, in context marked by, let's say, war, genocide, displacement, systemic violence, and all these things, storytelling becomes not only a mean of preservation, but a moral and psychological imperative, because it offers a space where suffering that defies articulation can be indirectly expressed and witnessed, and to an extent, contained. So, literature in such instances functions both as testimony and therapy. When I say therapy, basically it gives shape to experiences that resist conventional narrative. So I won't go into that detail, but trauma theory, particularly developed by Kathy Karoth, underscores the challenge of narrative traumatic experience. She draws on Freudian psychoanalysis. So accordingly, literary narrative shaped by trauma frequently abandon conventional chronology and coherence. So they reflect not only the events of suffering, but the psychic disarray that follows them. Thus, storytelling becomes an act of delayed witnessing, a recursive attempt to make meaning from the assimilable and unassimilable. One example is crucial here is Elie Wiesel's Night, quote unquote. Night exemplifies this testimonial function. So there is this stark, restrained prose that recounts the experience of Wiesel in Auschwitz and other places. So it bears the witness to the horrors of the Holocaust. The emotional power of the memoir emerges not from dramatic flourish, but from silence, repetition, and sparseness. So he writes, and I quote it, I'm reading this. Yeah. Never shall I forget that night. So this, the repeated phrase, it occurs everywhere. It anchors the traumatic memory, attempting to stabilize what trauma destabilizes. So the text functions as both record and reckoning. See, in South Asia, we have so many examples in context of partition, as Mantos Tobatek Singh, as Shiva said, and many others. Manto actually refrains from overt commentary because he allows the absurdist detail to carry emotional weight, which is an approach aligned with trauma literature's reliance on symbolic direction. Beyond the realm of fiction, storytelling plays a vital role in transitional justice. There is something called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, TRC, in the post-apartheid South Africa. So this institutionalized narrative as a means of national healing. Now here, victims of state violence gave public testimony. It was raw, fragmented, and often cathartic. So these narratives, though not literary in form, carried literary functions because they shaped memory, acknowledged pain, not escaping it, and enacted ethical witnessing. So it has been noted by the scholars that the act of listening is not passive. The listener actually becomes a co-witness, sharing in the burden of the story and validating the experience of the survivor.
So can we include Urvashi Butalia's The Other Side of Silence as a similar story where she has included the personal stories, the agonizing tales of the survivors?
Yeah, memoirs are actually a part of it. I think I was about to discuss not the same work, but memoirs as a.
She took interviews and then she recorded their stories, their personal stories.
Yeah, of course. I agree with that completely. Please, Dr. Shubha, let me know how much time do I have because I have lost a track of it.
Yeah, please continue. Sorry for interrupting.
No, not at all. No, it's a good thing if you interrupted me. So where I was now,
the personal narratives, personal narratives.
Right. In literature, informed by such testimonial process also, as Shubha said, uh, these forms often mirror psychological reality. Okay, so there is non-linear structure. There are poetic fragments and narrative gaps that reflect the dislocation and repetitive characteristics of trauma. Again, I'm taking one more example from Holocaust there because there are many. Charlotte Deblo's Auschwitz and After. So here we see this conventional structure shifting between prose and verse. Then there is memory and reflection. So she writes, I'm not sure that what I wrote is true. I am certain it is truthful. So you have to understand the difference between the two. As you said, the other example, her statement captures the central paradox of trauma narrative. Emotional truth can exist even in the absence of factual clarity. So these works do not seek any kind of resolution. Rather, they create a space for working through trauma. So in contrast to acting out, which reenacts pain compulsively, working through involves reflection, containment, and symbolic expression. So, literature, through its imaginative and affective capabilities, enables this process by transforming personal and collective ones into forms that can be shared and understood. So, ethics of trauma, or no, trauma storytelling remain complex, recounting suffering risks, re-traumatization, aestheticizing. It might trivialize the real. Yet the act of narration, whether through minimalist testimony, allegorical fiction or poetic silence affirms dignity. It insists on memory not as closure but as presence. If I remember correctly, a few years ago I saw this film. I do not entirely agree with that. It was a Marathi film. I saw the Hindi version, Firebrand. So this feels like a good example. The protagonist of the film, a woman, the heroine, she has been through a childhood rape, and it was a trauma in her head, and now she's a firebrand advocate right now. But that trauma again and again haunts her. So she goes to the therapist, and finally, going after many therapists, this one therapist suggests her that she writes that trauma, whatever happened to her, whatever she can remember, writes that on a piece of paper, like a story, very objectively. So she said that would re-traumatize me. He said, just do it, and do it every day. Like, you have to write the same trauma again and again and again. I do not know. As I said, I'm not a psychologist, I'm a teacher. So I do not know how that goes. If some psychologist is sitting here, perhaps they can tell us. But then she writes it. And at one point of time, she tells her husband, now I just feel that it's like a story of somebody else. So there is, maybe, if it's correct, then there is a healing involved. So, as I said, while literature shaped by trauma offers a powerful space for collecting and a collective and historical witness, the therapeutic dimension of storytelling is equally evident in more intimate, everyday encounters between reader and text. Central to this idea is the notion that reading is not a passive reception of meaning, but an active, emotionally charged experience. We have all read and taught reader response theory, the easiest example. Particularly, I agree with Louis Rosenblatt in this context, which foregrounds this dynamic, that the meaning of a text is co-created by the reader, whose personal history, whose emotions and inner world influence the interpretation. So, in this light, literature becomes not merely an object of analysis, but a site of potential healing. Um, there is a private exchange where readers may see themselves reflected and recognized and understood. So, this um, therapeutic potential is formalized in the practice of bibliotherapy. Uh, Bibliotherapy, as you know, the intentional use of literature to support mental and emotional health. So, though the term is quite modern, the practice has deep roots. In the ancient Greeks, libraries were inscribed with phrases like medicine for the soul, which actually suggests an early awareness of literature's healing potential. So, in the 20th century, bibliotherapy gained ground in clinical and educational settings where reading was used to help individual process emotional challenges, confront more dilemmas, and develop empathy. So, one um, historical example is the use of Jane Austen's novel in World War I hospitals. Soldiers recovering from trauma were encouraged to read Austen not merely as a distraction, as we may think, but for emotional regulation. So, Austen's structured social worlds and the characterization and moral clarity provided psychological stability amidst the disorientation of war. So, more recently, children's literature had played a vital role in helping young readers navigate uh, grief and loss. The Velveteen Rabbit, Bridge to Terabithia, all these kind of works, they allow children to encounter morality in a symbolic and age-appropriate form. They use narrative to scaffold emotional understanding. So, the therapeutic power of identification lies not only in similarity, but also in safe distance. Um, as a reader, I may process intense feelings indirectly through the imagined experience of fictional characters. So this symbolic mediation allows for emotional rehearsal, wherein one experiences the or I can experiment with the fear or sorrow or resilience without personal risk. In fact, Freud described this as a form of uh, vicarious catharsis, where unconscious emotions are discharged and explored through symbolic engagement. How much we agree with him, it's up to the degree of yours. Um, Moreover, bibliotherapy is not limited to professional practice. Many people instinctively turn to, uh, books in the time of crisis, not necessarily seeking solutions, but resonance. So, this intuitive reliance on literature is especially significant for those who may lack access to traditional therapeutic resources. For such readers, let's say literature offers what Virginia Woolf once described as a refuge for the mind, a place where thought and feelings are held and ordered and dignified. In contemporary psychology and narrative therapy, the healing power of story extends to writing as well as reading. Narrative therapy, as you know, it was developed by Michael White and David Epson, um, is grounded in the belief that people understand their lives through stories. When those stories are dominated by themes of failure or trauma or powerlessness, the therapeutic task becomes one of reauthoring. So, clients are encouraged to identify alternative narratives like stories of strength and survival agency that may have been silenced or overlooked. This echoes with the literary idea that the form of a story can shape emotional reality. There is this redemptive arc, the moment of recognition or restored sense of coherence that can make suffering bearable, sometimes even meaningful. At the intersection of literary reading and therapy lies the concept of narrative empathy. Um, the capacity of literature to expand readers' understanding of themselves and the others. Um, in this context, there is the work Poetic Justice by Martha Nussbaum. She argues that literature fosters ethical imagination, allowing readers to inhabit the perspectives of those different from themselves. So, this imaginative identification is not just morally enriching, it is emotionally reparative. By recognizing the shared contours of human suffering and resilience, readers may feel less isolated, more connected, because maybe more people are going through it. So now they are better equipped to face their own challenges. Importantly, healing through literature does not imply avoidance of pain. Rather, it involves confronting pain in symbolic form within the safe boundaries of language and plot and characters. A story does not offer clinical treatment, but it can offer some kind of containment and meaning, basically, emotional rehearsal. As readers move through the arc of a narrative from conflict to resolution, they may undergo a parallel process of emotional clarification. In sum, the reader's encounter with literature is a potent space for self reflection, there would be emotional processing. There may be quite transformation also. So whether through direct identification or symbolic resonance, literature enables a kind of inner dialogue, a story about oneself told with the help of another words. So in the now, if we talk about the modern literature, storytelling does not more than convey psychological distress. It becomes an expressive architecture through which trauma is both inhabited and reimagined. Unlike classical or folkloric traditions that often universalize emotion experience, modern fiction turns inward, making the fractured, fragmented integrity of the individual in its primary landscape. This shift is not only thematic but also formal. The disjointed syntax somewhere, the temporal disruptions, sometimes poetic excesses. So these characters, they characterize much of modern fiction, do not merely describe trauma, they enact it. So through such narrative strategies, fiction evolves into a site of both reflection and reconstitution, thus allowing suffering to be held, shaped, and dignified. Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf exemplified this inward turn, and we also know about the writer. Woolf does not offer narrative closure. Okay, the Septimus suicide is not resolved, but quietly absorbed in Clarissa's contemplations. Yet, by narrating his experience with complexity and compassion, Mrs. Dalloway accords it visibility and a symbolic legitimacy. Uh, so this um, another example could be On Earth We Are Briefly Gorgeous. This is by Ocean Young. So here we see there's the storytelling as an act of emotional reclamation. So it is structured as a letter from a Vietnamese American son to his illiterate mother. Now, in this novel, it merges the confession with the poetic memoir. So, in this memoir, Wong's narrator is a little dog, explores experiences of migration, radicalized violence, queerness, and generational silence in prose that is lyrical and vulnerable. I'm sorry, my throat is in a bad condition. So the narrative is built not for resolution, but for voice, for saying what could not be said. So the letter, although unread by its addressee, functions as a space of witnessing and becoming. And there are many such examples, impossible to talk about in a single session. So while modern fiction, as I said, articulates the psychological nuances of trauma and healing through literary forms, storytelling also finds vital application in clinical, medical, and palliative contexts, where it serves both as a diagnostic and therapeutic instrument. So, in environments marked by illness or decline, impending death, importantly, narrative becomes a way to reclaim agency. So, sometimes it constructs the coherence and affirm meaning when biomedical language proves inadequate. Within these contexts, storytelling transcends the literary. It becomes relational. At times, it also becomes sacred. Rita Charon is a pioneer in the narrative medicine. She argues that attentiveness to patients' stories is essential for ethical and effective healthcare. So, our model emphasizes narrative competence, the ability to observe and interpret and respond to the stories of others, as central to the medical practice. So when we talk about storytelling and we do not talk about the digital era, this won't be sufficient for the session. So in the digital storytelling or in the digital era, the ancient impulse to narrate one's inner world has not diminished. It has simply migrated to new platforms. We see the digital storytelling almost on each and every social media platform, Instagram stories or Facebook stories or YouTube blogs. This storytelling does not abandon tradition, it transforms it, enabling new modes of therapeutic expression. The same impulses that once shaped oral tales or personal letters now find voice in podcast monologues, Instagram stories, as I said earlier. So these platforms democratize storytelling and reform it as a participatory act of meaning making and emotional release. There is a lot of abuse also on social media. I agree with that. But among the most visible forms of digital narrative therapy is the public sharing of personal experiences with trauma, mental illness, grief, recovery, and you don't have to identify yourself. So there are also platforms like Reddit and the blog function that they are informal therapeutic spaces. They offer sort of narrative coherence and catharsis. For many, particularly those who without access to conventional therapy, these stories are the first step towards healing. There are programs like the Hilarious Worlds of Repression or Griefcast. So the podcast format, it stands out as a combination of intimacy and narrative cast. Similarly, there are social media platforms like Instagram Reels or TikTok that was earlier in India. They often dismissed as superficial, almost in a platonic way, they sometimes serve as potent vehicle for micro narratives. Users engage in ephemeral yet, meaningful acts of emotional expression through reels, stories, and symbolic imagery. They create aesthetic distance that support narrative catharsis. Um, Yet, the therapeutic promise of digital storytelling comes with ethical challenges. That sometimes the boundaries between confession and performance they can blur. So we do not know whether it's a safe space also. Anyway, well, storytelling functions as a mode of expression and healing. Its therapeutic power often relies on the interplay between the emotional immersion and psychological distance. So, a principle that is known as aesthetic distance. So, this is actually rooted in literary and psychological theory. So, aesthetic distance is created through devices such as metaphor, structure, fictionalization, allowing painful content to be processed in a psychologically manageable form. Aristotle's theory of catharsis reflects this, and we have seen earlier tragedy evokes fear and pity, but in contained narrative, allowing for emotional release without paralysis. Similarly, we talked about narrative therapy that externalizes distress through storytelling, shifting the subject from passing sufferer to active work. So, in literature, devices like symbolism and metaphor, for example, a storm representing the inner turmoil, function to mediate emotional content, enabling readers to engage without becoming overwhelmed. So, in contemporary media, aesthetic distance is managed through formal choices, such as the disjunctions, stylizations, or animation, very popular these days in trauma narratives, like the tale or the BoJack Horseman, these kind of things. So these strategies protect against re-traumatization, and because they enable ethical witnessing. Too little distance may lead to voyeurism, too much to detachment. So the right balance allows for empathy without overwhelm. So aesthetic distance deepens narrative's impact not by muting emotional, but by giving it some kind of form. So it transforms raw pain into structured expression, thus offering readers not escape, but recognition, reflection, and the possibility of healing. Now, in this context, I would like to conclude my session with a small story, because we are talking about small storytelling and we don't talk about story. I don't think that would be justified. I don't know how. I just want the audience now, all my friends, to hear. It's a very short story, and tell me later what you feel about it. So there was once an old monk who lived at the edge of a forest, and he owned almost nothing, just like a monk. He had a robe and a walking stick and a small clay bowl. So this bowl had been with him for years. It was cracked in several places, it was discolored and wood chipped around the edges. But the monk used it every day for eating, sometimes for water, even to light a small lamp at night sometimes. Now, one day, a traveler came to the forest and offered the monk, he was sort of a devotee. So he traveled to offer a monk, which was a new polished brass bowl. And he says, "See, this one is the clean, smooth, and unbroken. And let me replace that old thing for you." Now the monk took the brass bowl in his hand, admired its shine, and then gently handed it back. And he holds up his cracked clay bowl and he's saying, "This reminds me that I can still hold light even when broken." So when you here's your story, after that, I'm done with my part. I invite you to reflect on this. What do you think about the story? What does the clay ball symbolize? Does memory, self, relationship, past wound, whatever it is? What do you think the monk chose to keep the broken bowl? Um, what might the light represents in your own story? Things like that. And remember that there is this Japanese aesthetic of wabi sabi, the aesthetic of finding beauty in imperfection. So let me know what you think. Thank you, Shubha. Over to you.
What an interesting way to connect with your listeners, Dr. Nidhi Vats. So at this point, while our participants are preparing themselves for their responses, I would like to thank you for having this wonderful session with us today and for giving us a detailed treatment. In fact, you have given a broader treatment to the topic of discussion, the stories that we have around us, surrounding us, within us, and also not limited to any genre in particular, but to audio, visual, and memoirs, self narratives, and so on and so forth. So it has been a very intriguing as well as a thought-provoking session, as we have got a lot of ideas to think about, and also the way narratives function, the way narratives are composed, created. As we all know that narratives are symbolic representations of characters, episodes, events, incidents, things, ideas, thoughts that perturb us, that we face on day-to-day basis. So all of that, is with the help of metaphors and literary devices, it's transmuted, it's transferred, it's recreated. So yes, so I think the responses are coming now. Students, you have been told a story, a very beautiful short story, but with very deep meaning. You have been asked to reflect on the story. We'll appreciate if 4-5 of you, or more than 4-5 of you, as we have 278 participants in this refresher course. So more and more people should come up with their responses to the story. Why do you think the monk uh, insisted on having his old broken clay bowl instead of having a brand new shining sparkling brass bowl? Come on, participants. These sessions are supposed to be informative, interactive. I mean, they are informative. You have to receive information and act to it.
I'd just like to add that they don't have to answer my question. I'm not in my MA class now. But if you have such a life experience, where you see that the narratives heal. When I say repetitive storytelling, I'll tell you something funny that all our generation, I think Shiva would agree.
Sorry to interrupt. We can't see you. The video isn't working or what?
I think there is some, maybe some uh, network problem or something. I don't know, because my video is on from here.
All right. Okay.
So if you can hear me now,
Yeah.
Shubha would agree with me. All our generation was a huge fan of this sitcom called Friends. So
Yes.
whenever and now the Big Bang Theory. So whenever we feel a little depressed or something, we use a rerun, and I've done it for many years. So because that gives us some kind of uh, a containedness, because we already know what would going to happen. So that this is the repetition and the the knowingness of what's going to happen. It gives a lot of resonance. So this is a very rough example that I'm using now, but if you have something like that you have felt in your own life, please share, because I think that way the session would be successful.
Yes, absolutely. All of us, just like our comfort food, I mean, ghar ka dal chawal, we all have
Exactly.
comfort, music and some music that we always revert to, and also, the sitcoms and movies. I mean, in my case, Notting Hill. I mean, an incorrigible romantic Notting Hill and Pretty Woman. I mean, I keep going back to those movies. I don't know for what reason. So the thing is that all of us have similar experiences, and it actually heals us, in some way, help us, cope up with the stresses, all kind of stresses that we meet and face on day-to-day basis. I can see some of our participants are being very um, enthusiastic, and they have written few things. So I would like to read up. First of all, there's a question for you from Mr. Arun Lal. He wants to ask, how can storytelling help someone cope with trauma and stress?
There is also a related question. Generally, storytelling becomes interesting for children. I think this is by Dr. Trilochan Jana. But how stories can reduce the stress among adults? I'll try my best to answer this. As I said, I'm no psychologist, but in my point of view, telling or hearing stories help adults make sense of complex emotions, like grief or anxiety, maybe regret or hope. So it creates a safe distance from the painful experiences, allowing people to explore them without being overwhelmed. Like journaling or storytelling externalizes internal turmoil. So it offers some kind of, not everyone, but in some of us, clarity and catharsis. Also, sharing personal stories fosters deep human connection. That is this powerful antidote to loneliness and isolation, because now you know that perhaps somebody else is going through what you are going through now. So I think this can be the.
I think what it needs to cure diseases is a positive outlook. and stories and poems, they are sort of, they sort of distract us. They give us a creative, alternative, creative and a more positive alternative to think about, to talk about. And that's how, we are cured of the intensity of the emotions or, the diseases. So, yeah, in fact, it's very interesting. I've been narrative therapy yesterday. Professor Anand Prakash, who is a very eminent psychologist, and he had been professor and head of psychology department at Delhi University for several years. So, and an excellent psychologist. So he was talking about narrative therapy, Akhyan therapy. I mean, I could not get the whole of it, but then yes, I have also, sort of heard and connected the threads with other people, when they talk about how they are asked to let out all of their emotions, feelings by relating to some story they would have heard, and they could sort of give it an alternative ending, or they could change the characters, accordingly. So basically, they could recreate a story from a familiar story in order to express their pains and sufferings. So even in schools, children are encouraged to do journaling on day-to-day basis. I mean, I have a small child who is studying in the fourth standard, and I'm surprised to see that he's writing 4 or 5 pages every day. Her class teacher has asked all the students, as they have just returned from vacations and seem to be very, restless and lacking attention. So she has asked them to write their experiences of the vacation, and so that they can focus better. I believe similar practices can help us, guide us.
Absolutely. Actually, I asked my son, now he's 11 years old, but instead of telling him a story, I ask him every day, every night to tell me a story. So I'm a lazy parent, but that actually, through his stories, sometimes I used to know about the Pokemons and everything, sometimes about what he feels in the school. So sometimes it takes a serious turn, but then I have to know that he is able to narrate what he is feeling. Which is, are there some more questions, ma'am? Can you name a few online groups or platforms or apps concerning storytelling? I think, if I know correctly, there are online storytelling platforms like Maptia, there is Atavist, Inspire is also, I'm not sure about the name. And there are many storytelling apps that like makebeliefs.com things. Spotify is already there, right? I'm just telling you those who are not very famous. So these are some of them that you can start your own platform if you want.
Yeah, there's this question, Professor Vats, for you from Kishore Hirakant Agivale. I hope I'm
Is traditional storytelling, so storytelling on religious texts, Kathakar, are more relevant in today's scenario? Yeah, absolutely. I think if you go that way, um, uh, see, they're not just relevant, they are sort of resonating in new ways today. Because traditional Indian storytelling, in the very beginning of the session, Shubha talked about Panchatantra and others, especially Katha and the role of the Kadakar, continues to evolve while staying rooted in timeless wisdoms. Because, for example, now if you pay attention towards the new folklores or new folk songs, they include a lot of new vocabulary, which was not there earlier. So that way, the stories from Ramayana or Mahabharata or Bhagavad Puran still speak to universal human dilemmas. The duty, love, loss, resilience, maybe the context has changed. So in a fast-paced digital age, these narratives offer moral grounding and emotional clarity. This is what I think.
Absolutely. And they've sort of simplified, the text of difficult vocabulary that used to be there in, earlier text or the original text. So that also draws people towards these, these scriptures or writings, and they relate to today's world. So I mean, they're catching on, and they're getting immensely popular among the people. Even the youngsters are drawn towards those sessions. But all depends, how do you process those stories? Merely hearing is not enough. You have to take it in the proper perspective. Have to see. Simi Kapoor is praising your session. As far as the short story you mentioned, it seems that the goal is a connect with his reality and comfort, and he didn't want to change. Okay. So, I mean, overall, there have been a lot of, compliments for your sessions. Our participants have really benefited from your sessions. I myself have, have a few thoughts about stories. We keep hearing all kinds of stories around us, and sometimes it gets very difficult to distinguish between what is believable and what is not. Okay, and how much one can take in, because there are some. Okay, this is Simi Kapoor Mehta. I'll just stop here to take up a question from one of our participants. Simi Kapoor Mehta would like to know, how do you access futuristic sci-fi stories in the context of healing? Very good question. Professor Vats, if you are here.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, it's a very engaging question. Let's see if I can answer that. Um, the sci-fi stories, and actually they are one of my favorite genres, uh, can be surprisingly rich source of inspiration. Some science fiction novels and the series, they imagine these advanced healthcare system, perhaps emotional healing technologies, post-trauma societies. Um, so uh, there are a few standout examples. There's this Autonomous by Annalise Netwitz, the Hichi Saga by Frederick Paul. So these actually feature AI therapists and a society where the wealthy can access near immortality. There is the entire Star Trek universe, often which showcases healing technologies like tricorders or dermal regenerators, all these things. So, yeah, so this is what I feel about it.
Hmm.
Yeah,
But
there is
what I have.
there
Hmm.
are also the when reading or watching sci-fi through a healing lens, you can look for the regenerative medicines, the mental health tech, it also gives you a sense of relaxation that yes, there will be a future. We are not ending here.
I think they have coined a term for this, imagined escapes.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so they provide an outlet, safety valve, to process your grief and I mean, your restlessness or your distress, whatever you are going through. So, yeah, that ways they work beautifully. And young people are particularly interested in sci-fi because they can connect with, with their technological interest and so on. So I was just thinking that, there's a symbiotic relation that exists between the story and the listeners. And yes, we can never forget the narrator who is narrating the story. And, stories over the years, they have been utilized by political prisoners. I mean, remember prison diaries. We need to remember Gugi Thiango and Jawaharlal Nehru, Wole Soyinka, Nelson Mandela, and many others, who during their, the struggle for freedom of their country had spent time inside the prisons. And even women right activists, the way they have been, protesting, and they have been using stories as a strategy of resistance. So in a way, we see that, stories have given voices to people who have otherwise been subjugated and oppressed. As a result, there has been a discourse of solidarity. So what do you think? I mean, do you have any experience of working in a similar field where you might have worked for, uh, on the stories of women or underprivileged? I think you work.
Um, yes. Are you asking me or somebody else?
Yes, Nidhi, this question is, yeah.
All right. No, I thought maybe. Um, Now, not now, but when I was a student, I actually was a part of some projects with UNICEF and other, such organizations. There was Sansarg in Patna, and there was one more organization, I cannot remember the name now. There, I actually worked with the underprivileged women, and there was. And thank you for actually recalling that from me, because there was this project on the women in prison. Okay,
Oh.
so yeah, so I with one of my classmates, we used to interview these. This project was based in Saharsa. This is in North Bihar. So I don't remember the details and everything. Many years have passed. So we um, collected these stories of the women in prison, and some of them were eye-opening. I was almost a teenager. So it was, I was in BA at that time. So you can understand the shocks and other things that were coming to me. So, yes. And they gave me an entirely, because see, overall, if we see it that way, we come from a privileged scale. Okay, this is a privileged class in which we are. Uh, it's not that we don't have our own traumas, there are very much, but the trauma, the scale, that level that we see there is entirely different from the society in which we live in. So, yes, that was one thing that I faced personally.
Okay. So, I mean, those who work on similar kinds of narratives, the narratives created by the prisoners, ex-prisoners, or, underprivileged, or the suffering lots, I mean, their uh, their responses or their articulations, particularly, that's always questioned. That's always put under scrutiny, for inviting sympathy, for soliciting sympathy, and and help, and so on. Anyways, do you have anything to say about it? Is it this same
But
experience?
see, the experience that I had, not a single person said that they did it.
Hmm.
Many of them were murderers,
Hmm.
and they were actually facing prison time for it. But so, as I said in my discussion also,
Hmm.
the authenticity or the linear memory in this case is
Hmm.
not very trustworthy.
Hmm.
All right. But um, when there were a few people, I mean, two or three who actually said that why they did it. And when they were narrating it themselves,
Hmm.
we could see that there was a sort of sense of relaxation in their voice, that
Okay.
yeah, finally it's over, finally I, because I don't think even now Indian prisons have very, very good facility, or Indian system has a very good facilities of psychologists or psychiatrists for these kind of people. I'm not very sure. If somebody knows it, please tell me. So I think sometimes just able to narrate your trauma, and I know it because I felt it in my case also, just able to narrate trauma again and again to someone, it's very soothing, it's very healing,
Hmm.
quite relaxing.
Hmm. Okay, growing up, I mean, you would agree with me that we were told a lot of stories by our elders, by our grandparents, by our parents, and most of those stories they emphasized on role modeling, or putting ethical ideas and moralistic ideas into us, and they were also meant to inspire us. So, I mean, now at our age, do you think that some of those stories did not were not as good enough, to give us proper role modeling or positive role modeling, and needed to be deconstructed and sort of recreated or demolished or completely forgotten? I mean, we could forget them. We could do without them, basically. There were many such stories. I mean, I have.
See, growing up, parents are gods for us. They cannot do any mistakes. When we are in their shoes, now we know that no, they are human beings after all, and they can provide all sort of good and bad advices. all the sessions that are there. So yes, stories also, there are a few stories now we know that, now if specifically where the chaste women were the role models. So now we know that women need not be at that paradigm, that it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, as parents, I think we are more
Hello,
alert. We are more alert, and we sort of,
Shubha, am I audible? I think I just lost you.
yeah, yeah. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes, now I can hear you.
Because I can hear you.
Yes, yes,
I'm
yes.
just saying that, living in today's age and time, I think we are more alert parents, and we can definitely scan through the content and set the context right, and give the children what they need. I mean, that is also kind of imposing, but yes, at least we can save them from wrong ideas or from having negative thoughts in their minds. Okay, this is a small question from one of our participants. I just want to take this as listening.
Uh,
Now, which kind of storytelling is most beneficial, do you think?
Yeah,
So,
I mean, this is very difficult to say. Which kind of storytelling is more beneficial to say? It totally depends upon the context. You know, in what context, what story you actually want to take.
hmm,
Um, well, this is a question I think I need to think more about before answering it.
yeah, okay. And I
You
mean,
know, that maybe some of the stories may be beneficial types, like the narrative storytelling. It can be linear or personal, or the, let's say, some traditional cultural storytelling that is immersive and rhythmic, visual or multimedia storytelling maybe, which provides educational awareness and emotional impact. It depends upon the group, the age, the cultural background in which you're picking up the story, and your target audience.
hmm. Definitely. I mean, there are so many examples. I mean, there are so many kind of stories where readers can make informed choices. I mean, they can look up to content of their liking, their interest, and their need, and sort of progress in the desired manner. I have this thing that I mean, I have a query that I mean, as narrative therapy, it's becoming widely popular all over the world. Even in India, they are talking about it. So, do you think that it could be effective in addressing mental issues, anxiety, depression, etc.? I mean, do you have any idea of this narrative therapy?
Um, I think again, I'm audible.
Yeah, yeah, you're perfectly
Okay,
on.
right. See, as I said earlier, narrative therapy actually helps people externalize their problems.
Hmm.
So basically, this sees the issues like anxieties, depression, or trauma as separate from their identity. So instead of saying, let's say, I am depressed, someone
Hmm.
might say, depression has been visiting me lately. So
Hmm.
those sort of things. So this shift alone can be um, incredibly empowering.
Hmm.
So, what happens? How it actually supports mental health? That's whatever I have read.
Hmm.
Um, it helps the individual reclaim agency over their lives by writing disempowering narratives. So now the people gain insight into how their personal stories shape their emotions and behavior. So basically, by focusing on strength and values, the kind of resilience, people build the emotional resilience and sense of purpose. So this is how I think it works. Um, so unlike some other therapy that focus on, let's say, diagnosis of pathology,
Hmm.
narrative therapy sees the person as the expert of their own life. So
Hmm.
the therapist is more like a co-author,
Hmm.
helping the person explore, question, and reshape their story in a way that feels authentic and helpful.
Hmm. Yeah, so there are, I mean, as they say that each one of us has a storyteller in us, and
Yeah.
we create stories and do recreate stories, and we sort of live in those stories. But all of us have our favorite stories, as we were talking about our favorite comfortable, genres and stuff. So, what are your favorite stories, and how do you think those stories have helped you shape your perspective?
My my favorite stories are, I mean, I do not know whether being an academic is a good answer, but my favorite stories are those which I have uh, listened to, which my father actually told me. I have a lot of them. I mean, because we lived in an era which showed a lot of power cuts, so we
Mm,
used to sleep on the roofs of the terrace. Now we call them terrace of the house,
mm,
and then looking at the stars and the starry night and everything, my father used to tell us a lot of, there are a few stories my mother also told me and which I passed on to my son. But those are something that I can never forget. They actually shaped my life because there were many stories which reflected his own struggle
mm,
as a person who did not come from a privileged background.
mm.
So, yes, that way, those are my favorite stories. I don't know, I don't remember many of them now, thanks to the receding memory. But yes, because um, from the age of, I would say, I don't even remember, to the age of when I was a teenager and when I used to come home in the vacations every time, he has this huge treasure of stories even now.
Mm. Yeah, parents usually share a lot, and especially things that they feel need to be passed on to the younger ones, they sort of make it, yeah, digestible and pleasurable, and then they sort of, create a story out of it and pass it on. So all of us, we do it. We do it at a regular level. I think I have exhausted myself of all the stories that I could read and hear, telling stories to my son, and still he's hungry, and he has this huge appetite for stories, more stories every day. Anyway, so I was just saying that, while stories have helped us grow and learn our, I mean, learn things which help us in life, there are all sort of things, which come to us through stories which make us think, which disturb us deep down. I mean, it's not that, I mean, some stories leave smiles on our faces, and some stories make us think. So, personally speaking, I mean, I have been fond of all of those stories which made us think, and which made us wonder, which made us question the morality of the people also. I mean, surprisingly, those horrible stories with horrid content and the most unpleasant details, shocking the human expectation, they have stayed with me. I don't know whether it's right or wrong, but it has also,
No,
as a
absolutely,
psychologist.
absolutely. I remember I was some uh, 14 or 15 years old, and I read Agni-garbha by Mahashweta Devi, and I was not able to eat for 2 or 3 days straight. So
Mm,
that kind of impact a good narration or a good book actually does on you. So
mm,
it's actually true. You're saying that because that it is still lives with me. Now I'm more matured for it, and perhaps if I read something like this, I won't stop eating after it.
mm.
But at that time, it affected me a lot.
I
Do
think,
you have any such books which you remember, or
yeah,
films, perhaps?
yeah. I think there used to be this play titled Saint John in our syllabus, Antigone and Saint John. I mean, reading these plays in college, I mean, I used to have nightmares thinking that, women had to go through so much of, so much of injustice and so much of brutality and stuff. So I think what is going on here? Seema Sharma is saying कि इन्होंने भी पढ़ा है. Okay, yeah. So all of these stories with trauma, with some kind of trauma inbuilt in them, they sort of leave scars on your mind, and with the help of which you develop this fear psychosis. You always anticipate that this might happen, this might happen. I don't know how does it work in the mind, but to me, it has been, working in a negative way. I seem to be, fearing those kind of experiences or readings or stuff. But yes, those are part of our life, and as we know that literature is a depiction of life, it's a mirror of life, and it sort of engages with life in the most meaningful way. So it's all fine that the horrid realities also get represented so that they can be rejected and they can be sort of attacked. At this point, I think there are no questions, and our participants are very happy with the with today's session as we have talked about stories, and looks like some of them have gone to sleep listening to the talk on stories.
As I
But
said, this was a post-lunch session. It was about to happen.
it's not your fault. Uh, yeah, it's not your fault. They have two more sessions ahead. So all of you, please wake up and pay attention. And I take this opportunity to conclude the session now. From probing the darkness, real and imaginary fears, and the secret machinations of the human psyche, to instilling human values such as endurance, resilience, dignity, trust, sense of justice, cooperation, survival strategies, and discerning meanings through everyday banalities, the ever present mode of entertainment and edification, under the guise of pleasurable stories, has done it all. I would like to quote John Cheever here. He said, "Fiction is art, and art is the triumph over chaos. To celebrate a world that lies spread out around us like a bewildering and stupendous dream." Unquote. Today, one can clearly see that there are myriad of reasons for the popularity of the genre of story, and it has helped humanity cope with their circumstances by improving their critical understanding, adaptability, social skills, cooperative action, improved relationship, mental agility, imagination, pleasure quotient, linguistic development, and creative flair. So thank you, Dr. Nidhi Vats, for agreeing to do this with us, for being here, for taking out your valuable time to address our participants, for sharing your expertise on the subject. And dear participants, we are glad that you are listening to us and you are responding and you are thoroughly involved. And I would also like to thank our principal, Professor Gyantosh Kumar Jha, for creating this wonderful platform where we can exchange informations and new ideas and also sort of plan our future researches. Extremely grateful to the convener of the research refresher course committee, Professor Vinita Tuli and Professor Anjali Gupta for guiding us, for motivating us, and my fellow colleagues and members of the refresher course committee and Dr. Shiva Kumar for the technical expertise. Thank you for making all of this very smooth experience. And I think the moderator for the next session, Dr. Arvind Kumar Mishra, is already here. So over to you, Dr. Mishra.
Sure.
You can take it from here.
So I'm leaving now, Shubha. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful to have you here. Okay, thank you so much. Participants, the speakers, and the moderator for the next session are already here, so please stay tuned.
मानवेंद्र देखिए, क्या नीलाक्षी मैम ज्वाइन कर चुकी हैं तो उनको को होस्ट बना दिया जाए।